Hello to everyone on the Better Reading Facebook page. Thank you very much for being here on a Wednesday night at 8 o'clock on it's Australian Eastern Daylight Time. I'm in New South Wales. If you are here and watching, please let me know and tell me where you're watching from. It's always great to know where people are around the country. Maybe you're overseas, who knows? So just let me know your town or your city or whatever you'd like to tell me. And otherwise, I'm just going to sit here and talk about my books. Well, that's what I'm here to talk about, but I'll start doing that anyway. Hello, Christine from Ballarat. I hope you are not too badly flood affected recently, because it seemed like pretty much the whole of Victoria was, but particularly the Ballarat region. Hello to anyone else who's out there. If you'd like to tell me where you're from, that will be lovely. I am Sophie Green. A whole lot of comments just popped up. Rosalind in Perth, it's only 5 p.m. there. Thank you, Rosalind, for checking in at 5 p.m. Hello, Veronica in Sydney. Jessica, hello. Camperdown, Victoria, thank you for reading my books. And someone else from Sydney, Carolyn, hello. Great to see you. Gippsland, Wendy from Wagga Wagga, one of my favourite places. And I've been going to Wagga since I was a child, get back there fairly regularly. So thank you for tuning in. Pauline from Westlake, South Australia, thank you. Sally, Ballarat as well. So hello to you. From me, I'm in Sydney, Lower North Shore area, Barrogal Country, in the Eora Nation. Renata in Halls Gap, Victoria. A few Victorians, lovely to see you. Thanks for being here. So yes, I'm Sophie Green. I am the author of a few books, starting with the inaugural meeting of the Fairvale Ladies Book Club in 2017, the Shelley Bay Ladies Swimming Circle in 2019, Thursdays at Orange Blossom House. Last year it was a pandemic release, but the little formats come out this year, and then the Bellbird River Country Choir came out August this year, because I write them the year before. Sometimes I have to stop and think exactly when they do come out. But this one came out in August. I was in Wagga Wagga actually doing some events. I've been in Victoria, I've been in Queensland, and it's always lovely to travel around our beautiful country, meet people, talk about books. If you have any questions for me about writing, about any of my books, anything to do with publishing, because that's my day job, working in publishing, please do put them in the comments. Okay, Veronica has asked already. Thank you for your question, and hello to Jenny from Armidale. And Wendy, you met me in Wagga a month or so ago. I'm sure you did. I can't see your photo, so I can't recognize you, but thank you very much. So Veronica, yes, Bellbird River Country Choir is set in 1998. Now, the whole thing of setting my books in the recent past started with Fairvale, and that was set in 1978. And the reason I set that in 1978 was because it's a book club, and I wanted the first book the Fairvale ladies read to be The Thornbirds by Colleen McCulloch. That was released in 1977. And so I calculated how long I thought it would take women living on a cattle station and in Katherine in the Northern Territory to hear about the Thornbirds and find copies of it so they could read it. And I figured like the middle of 1978 would do it. And so I never knew if there'd be another book after Fairvale. And once Shelley Bay came along, I set that not long after Fairvale. And then I decided to not just keep going in that pattern. So when it came to Bellbird River, the opening chapter is, the point of view is a character called Alex. So the first character who comes to me for every book is the character who gets the first chapter. And I knew that Alex was living in Sydney, but she wanted to leave. And I kept thinking, why does she want to leave? And then it came to me, the Sydney Olympics were coming and the city was becoming quite unmanageable. I'm from Sydney. I remember what the city was like then. And there was, it was hard to get around. There were lots of people moving in, and so Alex was trying to navigate being a sole parent, having a job, and she just thought it would be better to get out and move to a country town. So once I realized that, it was like, okay, it's 1998. And I took it from there. And then I had a lot of fun reinvestigating music from 1998. Christine's reading Bellbird River. Thank you so much. And Sharon's asked how I choose my characters' names. Well, very carefully, actually, because I always want to make sure the names are appropriate for the time the book is set in. So it's no good choosing a name that's popular now for a character that's in a novel set even in the recent past, because trends of names change. So there are no Harrisons before Harrison Ford, basically. I contend it was actually It's a post-Indiana Jones trend, not a post-Star Wars trend for the name Harrison. So don't want to have a Harrison in a novel set in 1978, for example. So what I do is once I know the years of the characters' births, then I will go often to birth records if I can find them, just births, deaths, and marriages records, and look up popular children's names from those years. And I even did it for two characters in Thursdays at Orange Blossom House who were German. I looked up German birth records to find out popular names for the years they were born in, and don't necessarily choose the most popular names, but those lists tend to give you the top 50, sometimes top 100. So I'll look through those and just see which name feels right for the character. I also have to think of names I've already used, and I have to avoid names of people I know because I don't want them getting shirty if they don't like the character. So it's more about whether the names just resonate. In Bellbird River, the character Victoria was absolutely and unequivocally a Victoria. Didn't look up any birth records for her. I just knew that was her name and it was never going to be changed. So, and Janine was also very much a Janine. And there was someone who put a comment on Facebook saying that she's a Janine and she's never seen a character in a book called Janine, and she was really pleased to see one, which made me very happy because I just thought, well, Janine was always Janine in Bellbird River. So Christine's asked how I go about developing the characters. Well, once I know the year a book's going to be, or a story will be set in, and the location, I just sit fairly quietly and ask whoever is around at that time and in that place and wanting their story told to show up. And that's something that comes out of my long time yoga practice, actually, just being able to sit, empty my mind to a certain extent and be present for whatever's there. It sounds a bit woo-woo. It is a bit woo-woo. I make no apology for it. But I tend to just turn up. And, in the case of Victoria, she just strode into the story and commanded the space. And then her cousin Gabrielle came along not long afterwards. Gabrielle actually was originally a character who had a point of view. And then I thought I should take it away from her and just make her a subsidiary character in Victoria's story, but she very much insisted on having her own storyline, and they can be very bossy, these characters, and Gabrielle's been the bossiest thus far. I call them the terrible twosome. They're cousins, and I thoroughly enjoyed spending time with them, as bossy as they were. But characters will often just have a way of turning up and settling in. And in the case of Janine, who I mentioned, she quietly broke my heart for several months while I was writing it. She was just sort of sitting at a low resonance within me. Debbie is another one in Bellbird River who had some heaviness to her. And so sometimes when those characters show up, I know there's something going on with them, but I don't know exactly what it is. So that too is a process of just sitting with them, sitting with the story. Sometimes I find out in the writing what's going on with them. Sometimes I don't find out till I'm rewriting what's actually going on. Eventually they'll reveal their stories to me. So it is that weird thing of them being people I create, but then it feels always like they're people who are visiting me. And I remember years ago, I studied the novels of Alice Walker, who wrote The Colour Purple, and she talked about how the characters in The Colour Purple showed up in her kitchen one night and didn't leave for a year. And that's when she knew she had to write about them. So I think it's a bit like that. They turn up and they insist on being known, and it's not unpleasant. And I'm always quite sad, actually, when I send off the last set of page proofs after I've had my last read through and I know I can't do any more for them. And so I always feel like I'm letting them go out into the world, and then they go to other people and their stories are yours if you're a reader. They don't belong to me anymore, and that's my job, to send them out into the world with their stories, and hopefully they connect with readers and do some good. That's what I hope they will do. Okay, let's have a look. Thank you, Alona. Sorry, I misread that. My glasses probably need tuning up. Thank you, Wendy, for enjoying Fairvale. I often think about Fairvale because it's set in the Northern Territory, and it was the first story like that I'd written, and the Territory inspired it so much. And if anyone's been to the Northern Territory, they'll know how it really just sits with you and doesn't let you go. In fact, it grabs hold of you and doesn't let you go, and that's where that story came from. Tam, thank you so much for reading the books, and thank you, Judy. Thanks, Cheryl. Ah, Rosalind, read it while staying in Cairns. That's how appropriate. Um, Wendy's saying, yes, I get all the basic details before the story builds. Yeah, I do. I do a lot of planning, actually. My process for the novels now, it's a bit more detailed than it used to be, in that I think when I wrote Fairvale, I did a bit of planning, and certainly by the time I was rewriting it, I knew that I had to get a few more details written down. I couldn't just rely on myself to remember what year the characters were born, that sort of thing. By the time I was writing Shelley Bay, knew I should start with birth years and that sort of thing. And then by the time I got to Thursdays at Orange Blossom House, I really ramped up my planning, and through Bellbird River, and now the one I'm working on for next year has been the most planned of all. But because I have a full-time job and I have a hobby writing about Australian country music, and I have a few other things going on, that planning is essential because I don't have a lot of time to write. So when I finish here tonight, I'll be going to work on the redraft of next year's novel, and I can do that excuse me, in a short space of time tonight, just do a chunk of it because I've been planning. So for anyone who's curious, the planning looks like, first of all, doing character profiles. And I found something called the 12 questions framework just 12 questions in a book called The Thorn Necklace by an American novelist called Francesca Lea Block, whose work I love. And I don't answer all the questions because they're mainly set up when there's just one point of view in a story, but I certainly will fill out most of them for each character. And so I start with those character profiles and do a lot of thinking about who they are and what they want and what they need and what their arc is. So their emotional arc, where they start, what the middle is going to be like if there's a crisis, and then how they're going to end up. And that sort of work helps me when I'm in the writing of the manuscript or the rewriting and I want to solve a problem. I'll often go back and look at those documents and think, well, what did I think was going to happen to this person? And usually it tallies with what's come out in the story. So that tends to just embed itself in my subconscious as I go. And then after the planning documents, I do more planning documents for the characters, which contain major plot points for their story arc. And for next year's book, I've actually done a month-by-month breakdown in the story with quite a lot of detail about what's happening with each particular character. And ultimately what it all feeds into is a document I call the grid. Such an imaginative name. It is a color-coded, landscape-oriented table in a Microsoft Word document where each character has a different color. And that's so I can see the flow of points of view as I go through. And that is a living document. So I will plan the first 15 chapters or so before I begin writing anything. And I know in doing that planning that they will change, that something in there is going to change, because as I start writing, the characters will start chattering to me and telling things. And so I do about 15 chapters, and then I keep going another chunk of chapters. And I don't actually put the last chapters into that grid until I'm pretty close to writing them, because everything can change up to that point. And now that I'm doing a new draft for next year's novel, that grid has a version 2, and it's got notes all over it. So it's a very messy looking document. I would never show it to anyone, but it works for me. And it just means that if I know I have limited time, then I will look at what I'm going to do next. Like earlier this evening, I looked at what I'm going to be working on later, so that it just goes into my brain and it'll just fizz away there till I'm ready to sit down. Wendy's visited the NT. Yeah, it's an amazing place. So Veronica's asked how I researched the character of Debbie. I'm possibly referring to some of the things that have happened to Debbie or that she's done in the past. And that came directly out of me actually having a Bachelor of Laws. And so when I was studying my law degree, I did a lot of electives in criminal law, and within that, criminology and prisons and those sorts of things, and theories of imprisonment and theories of criminal behavior, all sorts of things. And so that's giving away a bit about Debbie for those who haven't read it, but that's where that came from. A lot of essays essentially that I wrote in the past. Thank you, Rita, for reading. Thank you, Coral. Alona's asked, all the novels have exquisite covers. Do I have any input? The input I have is to let the publisher know what birds and plants are in the books, basically. When it came to Fairvale, so I'll reach over here. So Fairvale is the first one, and there is a Major Mitchell's cockatoo on the cover. So this is the one set in the Northern Territory, and the publisher for this one said to me, "Oh, are there any birds that get a mention in the Northern Territory in the novel, or are there any birds that are native to the Northern Territory that you could mention?" And I said, "Well, most of the story's set in the top end. One character lived in Alice Springs, but the cockatoos that are native to the top end are red-tailed black cockatoos." And because I've worked in bookselling and publishing, I said to her, "I'm presuming that's not the color of bird you'd like," because it wouldn't stand out very well on a cover. And she said, "No." And I said, "Well, one of the characters lives in Alice Springs, and the Major Mitchell's cockatoo is native to that area. So that is that lovely pink situation there." And I said, "I can drop in a mention of a Major Mitchell's cockatoo if you would like." So that's what happened. And that's ended up on the book. And so by the time I got around to Thursdays at Orange Blossom House, because it was set in far north Queensland, anyone who's been there knows how lush it is and such beautiful trees and flowers. So I was keeping a list of plants that I'd mentioned. Bellbird River, same thing. Birds, plants that I mentioned, I sent them a list, and then with next year's one as well. So that's the input I have. As you can see, there's a cover look. So it's Krista Moffat, who is Christabella Designs, who designs all these covers. And Fairvale set the tone, and she won a design award for that, which was fantastic. And so that's just carried on that similar look. And then the main input I get now after sending off the details is being sent a cover concept and asked if I like it or not. So this one was either lilac or green, and we all unanimously chose the green version. Next year's, who knows? I wait to see. I'm waiting to see right now actually what next year's will be. And Veronica says she also loves the covers. Yeah, they certainly make me smile. And each time one of these covers appears, I think, oh, that's definitely the most beautiful. But then there's another one. And Bellbird River, particularly, I think is lovely. The cover finishes, if you're interested in books, cover finishes are a bit of a thing. They've come up beautifully. So yes, please, if you're just joining us, ask me any questions you like about my books, about writing, about publishing, or anything. I've been a bookseller, an editor, literary agent, publisher. I also, as I mentioned, have a hobby writing about Australian country music. And actually, I don't think I'd be writing fiction without Australian country music, because 11 years ago, I started this blog, because it's now an enterprise more than a blog. And I had many years ago, when I lived in Vancouver, BC, done some interviewing and reviewing for a street press magazine, and it was music focused. And then 11 years ago, I actually was extremely sick, and I couldn't teach yoga anymore. I couldn't do anything. I was incapacitated for a while, and I really needed a creative outlet, mainly to keep myself sane. And that's when I thought of picking up that practice that I'd had years before of reviewing and interviewing. And so I contacted some publicists, and they very kindly would send me music and set up some interviews. And from that, it's now become this whole thing I do. But I've interviewed hundreds of country music artists over the years, because country music is about storytelling. And I often talk to these artists about their songwriting process and about how they feel about audiences and performance. I have learned a lot, I realized, not that long ago, from them, and how they see their roles as storytellers and how they choose to communicate. And because songs are so tightly constructed, and you have 3 minutes to get a story across, they're really expert at distilling the story to its core. And that practice also of writing about music, of having to describe something that can be quite difficult to describe, was basically my writing practice. And that stood me in really good stead, just getting novels written around other things. Because if I'm banging out a blog post without much warning, like I've got a video premiere for tomorrow, and last night I just thought, I better write something, get it scheduled, and I'm now used to doing that. So that's been a really helpful practice. So Sharon's asked, what do I like to read? A whole lot of stuff. I've always been an eclectic reader. I think that's because that's how I was raised. My parents read widely. My mother in particular has no awareness of genre. She'll just read something if it sounds interesting. I do read a lot of nonfiction, always have. I love it. Particularly love history books. Sitting here, I've got Pharaohs of the Sun. New Kingdom Egypt is one of my favourite subjects, and that's a new book about New Kingdom Egypt. I also have The Duchess Who Dared, about the Duchess of Argyll, Courtiers by Valentine Lowe, but I read a lot of fiction as well. I just bought the new Taylor Jenkins Reid. It's about tennis, my favourite sport, and I have read some of hers in the past. Trying to be au fait with the book talk, a bit hard to keep up. So yeah, I'll read a lot of things. I also read a lot of magazines, like to read newspapers. So I think reading's just a state of being. For me, I'll read anything at any time. If I'm paused in a shop somewhere, I'll probably read the back of a packet of something. Carolyn's asked, can I tell you about the book I'm writing now, please? I don't know that I'm allowed to tell you too much, apart from the fact that it's set in Southeast Queensland, and it is in 1988. 87, 88. And I haven't been told I'm allowed to talk about the subject matter yet, but there will be four main characters in it, and quite a few plants, let's put it that way. Tam's asked, is there going to be a country music themed choir? No, because I considered doing a country music novel, but then I realized I know too many people in country music, and that could be a little odd. So what I did was set my fictional town, Bellbird River, near Tamworth, because that's an area that means so much to me, because that's where the Country Music Festival is. And I just thought, okay, that's in my heart of hearts, that's where it needs to be. And I looked at the map and I looked at the roads, and I thought, okay, I think it's near the Kamilaroi Highway, which is going from Corinda to Tamworth. And then I looked at where there was a patch of land big enough to hold a town, and where I could put fictional roads and it would make sense. So that was the country music aspect. And I do have Gabrielle in Bellbird River being quite disdainful of country music, but I also have a choir member, Jimbo, who keeps trying to get Slim Dusty's Lights on the Hill in the choir. And that's a nod to Australian country music. Lights on the Hill was written by Slim's wife, Joy McKean, who is an incredible titan of Australian country music. And Joy won the first ever Golden Guitar Award for writing Lights on the Hill. So for country music people, that particular song means a lot. So yes, as I said, that was my tip of the hat to country music. And I did have a lot of fun thinking about which songs might work in the choir. They had to be songs that could be adapted for choir. I relied on my choir knowledge from being at school, but also being in a band where I was the backup singer, and that involves harmonies. So I was trying to think of all these songs and how the harmonies might work into them, and therefore could they be band songs, choir songs rather. So that was a lot of fun. Donna's asked, what advice would you give for someone interested working in publishing, study marketing? I think if you want to go into the marketing side of it, perhaps, but I always think book selling is actually the best background. There are so many of us working in publishing who started as booksellers, including me. I was a bookseller for 5 years of university and then a year in Canada. That was a children's bookseller. And everything I know, editing, agenting, writing, publishing, comes from that time being a bookseller. So I'd say do that. Also, a lot of publishers, including Hachette, where I'm published, have internship programs going. So I'd say keep your eyes open for that. That would be appearing on various publishers' websites. If you have a writer's centre in your state, sign up for their newsletter or join the Writers' Centre, because they'll probably distribute that news as well. So there are more opportunities now to have access into publishing companies than there ever used to be, because there never used to be paid internships or any kind of internships. So it can be difficult just because there aren't a lot of jobs, but I'd say bookselling is a great place to start, because you learn so much about how and why people buy books, about what the trends are, and you get to meet people on the publishing side as well. And people have gone from the retail side into the publishing side. Cindy loves Thursdays at Orange Blossom House. Thank you so much. That feels to me like that book, because it came out in the pandemic, it just felt like I was putting it out into the void. And because it's about a yoga class, and I've been teaching yoga for a long time, it really was so close to my heart. And in case you're curious at all, Cindy, the yoga teacher in that, Sandrine, is not based on me personality-wise, but everything that comes out of her mouth in a yoga class is something I have said while teaching yoga, because I just thought I'm not I'm not going to try and invent this. I will just plagiarize myself. It's a lot easier. Carol said she always seems to particularly like your older lady characters. Where do I get the inspiration for them? Well, I grew up around a lot of older people. I grew up around my maternal grandparents. I had a babysitter who was also my piano teacher, who actually a character in the next book will be named after, and spent a lot of time with her. And then my parents' friends, my brother and I were always spending a lot of time around, and they were obviously a lot older than us, although not older people at the time. But I've stayed friendly with a lot of them. And so I'm often having chats with my mum's friends on the phone. Just seems quite normal to me to have friends of different ages. I have friends who are quite a lot older than me and quite a lot younger. So Louise has asked, do I have a favorite author? Not one in particular. And it chops and changes. So I mentioned Alice Walker earlier, and I was obsessed with her when I was studying her. Also loved James Baldwin. Obsessed with Ruth Park when I was a younger person. So I think it just depends what I'm reading. I was also a big Salman Rushdie fan for a long time. So, but then you can move on, and there's always so much to read. So I don't have one particular favorite. Coral has said maybe some of your older girls might like a trip to Egypt. No, there's a touch of the Agatha Christie's about that, I think. Wendy said she just remembered Shelley Bay Ladies Swimming Circle. She finds it interesting to see the reference to the Man from Snowy River and Paul Hogan when setting the scene for it. Well, the Man from Snowy River was a really significant cultural moment, and in the way the Thornbirds was. And a few months ago, I just got back from the Tamworth Country Music Festival in April, and Tom Burlinson, who was the star of the movie, was appearing at a screening of it at my local cinema. And it was a sold-out session. It was a massive theatre, and everyone was so enthralled, hooting and hollering in all the right places. And we didn't actually know Tom was in the cinema at the time. We thought he was just coming in at the end. And Lorraine Bailey was there as well. Lorraine's in the movie. She was also in The Sullivans. And so it was just this great nostalgic moment, I guess, for everyone who was watching it, but also a reminder that it was a really captivating movie. And that's the reference there is to the movie rather than the poem. And I think for Australians of all ages at the time it was released, it was a big deal. And Paul Hogan, well, yeah, it's not as politically correct as he once was, but everyone knew about Hoax, and he also was a cultural moment. So when I'm trying to set the scene in these novels, I am trying to pick things that people can remember and relate to in their own lives, just little cultural historical things that might ping a memory, and so the reader can put themselves where they were at that time and then think of these characters living there. So it is very much with these stories a case of dropping into the lives they have at that point in time, rather than necessarily coming to a resolution. Sometimes people ask me why I don't neatly tie up stories, and it's because life is not neatly tied up. And with Fairvale, I just knew, and that was really what set the template for how I would do the others. I just knew I didn't want to tie everything up with a bow, because as a reader, I often don't enjoy that. I don't believe it. And I just like the idea of leaving those ladies in the Northern Territory, and the reader could decide what happened to them. Having said that, it is the novel about which I get the most requests for a sequel. And I just say, nope, I left them in the Northern Territory. You can decide what happened to them. And who knows, they could still be there, although that was the 70s, so maybe not. Yeah, none of these get tied up too much, and that's fine with me. I think it's great for the readers to have a bit of a role in what's going on. So we're coming up to time very shortly. Tam's asked, would I ever do a follow-up to a particular novel? Tam, I'm not sure which one you mean. I would never write sequels to any of them, actually, because I just think, again, it's for the readers to decide. And I could put a story out there that is a sequel, but then the readers who ask for that sequel may not agree with me. So, and I just move on. I move on to the next thing. If anyone's a fan of The West Wing and they know President Bartlet says, "What's next?" As far as I'm concerned, that's me. What's next, story-wise? Always have lots of ideas, and I keep notes for all sorts of ideas. I have many novels queued up for various things, which may or may not come to fruition. I'm also not a believer that every idea needs to be written out. Sometimes I'll get a few thousand words into something and think it's not going anywhere. That doesn't happen as much anymore, but I do have quite a few 20,000 word manuscripts that are just never going to see the light of day because they were just never going to work. But it was good practice. I don't think any writing is wasted. Thank you, Carolyn, and Wendy, thank you so much. She has intentions for reading all my books. Well, I hope you enjoy them when you get to them. It is 8:30, so unless anyone has a last question, I will wrap it up and leave you to your evening. And whatever you're reading next, I didn't even get a chance to ask you what you're reading. I was also fully intending to ask if anyone was listening to Taylor Swift's album, but I've run out of time. So I'm listening to Taylor Swift's album. I hope you are. If you are, I hope you're enjoying it too. That is also a cultural moment. I'm very much enjoying the cultural moment. So thank you so much for your time on this Wednesday night. Enjoy the rest of your week and your weekend, wherever you are in Australia. Thank you very much for tuning in. And I'll see you another time. See you down the road.